this stage that the timing of that trip might have been intentional because something was going on back home that they didn't want him to see. Well, what I'm about to tell you guys today is going to positively blow your mind.
You never become the CEO and chairman overnight, because now when people have questions, you got to answer them, right? You're not just a grieving widow, but you very quickly decided that you were equipped to be Charlie. Well, guess what? That's going to be a trial by...
Stop scrolling, because what you're about to hear isn't just another political headline. It's a legal, emotional, and explosive war that has split an entire movement down the middle. This is the moment everything snapped. Candace Owens has officially filed a trademark over Charlie Kirk's name, and within days, Charlie's own parents responded by suing her. Not trolls, not critics, his parents. And that single move has turned grief into courtroom warfare, allies into enemies, and silence into something far more dangerous. Here's why this story has people shaken. Candace claims this was never about money, never about clout. She says she acted because the pieces stopped adding up. The rushed power transfer, the sudden rise of Erica Kirk as CEO, the absence of an interim leader, the media tours that began before the morning ever settled. According to Candace, the timing wasn't just uncomfortable. It was alarming. Then came the claims that changed everything. Candace alleges she received information pointing to secret military-linked meetings, high-ranking officials, and the shocking implication that someone from Charlie's inner security circle may have been present. She says that's when she realized, if she didn't move fast, the truth would disappear forever. And so she made the move that detonated everything, locking down Charlie Kirk's name. What happened next stunned even her. Instead of support, she was hit with lawsuits. Instead of answers, she got silence. Instead of unity, she was labeled obsessed, unhinged, dangerous. Influencers backed away overnight. Pusa challenged her publicly. And suddenly, Candace Owens, once surrounded by power, was standing completely alone. Now the internet is split down the middle. One side says she's the only person brave enough to ask the questions no one else will. The other says she crossed a line that can never be uncrossed. And hovering over it all is one haunting question no one can seem to answer. Why did everyone go quiet at the exact same time? This isn't just about a trademark. This isn't just about a lawsuit. This is about who controls the story and who gets erased when they refuse to stop talking. And the scariest part? This story doesn't feel over. Feels like it's just getting started. Stop scrolling. Because this is not a tribute. This is not a rumor. This is the moment a political empire cracked open, and everyone inside panicked. What you're about to hear is a story so volatile that families turned into legal enemies, allies became liabilities, and one of the loudest voices in conservative media was suddenly standing completely alone. This is the Candace Owens versus Charlie Kirk saga, and it starts with a death that never stopped raising questions. Charlie Kirk was gone. The movement was in shock. But before the grief could settle, before the dust could even fall, something strange happened. Power moved fast. Too fast. Within days, Erica Kirk stepped into the role of CEO and chairman. No interim leadership. No pause. No public transition. Just an instant takeover that left insiders whispering and critics uneasy. In moments like that, people expect silence, mourning, space. What they saw instead was visibility. Travel. Media appearances. Positioning. Branding. And that's where Candace Owens says her doubts began. She wasn't questioning grief. She was questioning timing. According to Candace, the speed at which control changed hands didn't feel organic. It felt strategic. And in environments built on influence, strategy is never accidental. She claims she watched as questions were quietly discouraged, as people were told not to push, not to speculate, not to dig. The message was clear. Move on. But Candace didn't. Behind the scenes, she says she started receiving messages, tips, fragments, pieces that didn't fit the official story. And then, according to her, something landed that changed everything. A set of receipts she claims forced her hand. Candace insists this wasn't curiosity. It was alarm. She claims the information pointed to internal inconsistencies, unexplained gaps, and connections that shouldn't exist in a random tragedy. She says she realized that if she didn't act immediately, the narrative would be locked down permanently. And so she made a move that stunned everyone watching. She filed to trademark Charlie Kirk's name. To supporters, it looked like protection. To critics, it looked like exploitation. To Charlie's family, it looked like war. Candace says the trademark wasn't about money, it was about control. Control over how Charlie's name would be used, who could profit from it, and who could shape the story moving forward. She claims that without legal leverage, the truth, whatever it was, could be buried under branding, books, and politics. But the backlash was immediate and brutal. Instead of cooperation, she got lawyers. Instead of conversations, she got silence. Charlie's parents didn't call her. They didn't ask for clarification. They went straight to court, accusing her of capitalizing on their son's death. And with that filing, everything changed. Because once family enters the courtroom, there is no neutral ground. Candace suddenly found herself recast, not as an investigator but as a villain. Influencers who once amplified her voice went quiet. Allies distanced themselves. Words like obsessed, unhinged, and dangerous began circulating. The tone shifted overnight and the message was unmistakable: stop talking. But Candace doubled down. She began publicly alleging that Charlie's death wasn't random, that it wasn't simple, that it involved people far closer than anyone wanted to admit. She spoke of secret meetings, military-linked sources, and claims from an anonymous veteran who alleged witnessing a high-level gathering tied to the aftermath of Charlie's death. She framed it as coincidence at first, then as confirmation. And the more she spoke, the quieter everyone else became. Candace pointed to the sealed autopsy. She questioned why details were restricted. She raised doubts about weapon narratives that, according to her, didn't survive expert scrutiny. She questioned security failures, and then questioned the people tasked with protecting Charlie that day. Most controversially, she began naming names, always couched in claims and allegations but sharp enough to land. And that's when Turning Point USA stepped in. Publicly, TPUSA dismissed her claims as reckless. Privately, the walls went up. Candace was challenged to confront leadership live, a move she interpreted not as transparency, but as a trap. She refused. And that refusal became the final justification to isolate her completely. By then, the damage was done. Candace Owens, once surrounded by microphones, platforms, and power, was standing alone against Charlie Kirk's parents, his organization, and much of the movement he built. And the internet split in half. One side believed she crossed an unforgivable line. The other believed she got too close to something she wasn't supposed to see. And hovering over it all is the silence. Because when everyone with answers stops talking at the same time, people start asking why. This isn't about agreeing with Candace Owens. This isn't about proving her right or wrong. This is about what happens when grief, power, and unanswered questions collide. And no one wants to be the last person still asking. The silence didn't come by accident. It arrived like a coordinated blackout, sudden, complete, and terrifyingly efficient. Because the moment Candace Owens refused to back down, the tone of this entire saga shifted from controversy to containment. What followed wasn't debate. It wasn't dialogue. It was isolation. According to Candace, doors that were once wide open slammed shut overnight. Calls stopped getting returned. Messages were left on read. People who once praised her courage suddenly spoke in careful, sanitized language, or stopped speaking at all. And in the world of power, silence is never neutral. Silence is strategy. Candace began warning her audience that something bigger was happening behind the scenes. She said the pressure wasn't just social, it was legal, reputational, and psychological. She claimed that the same people who told her to be patient were now quietly positioning her as unstable, reckless, and dangerous. Not because she was wrong, she says, but because she wouldn't stop. And then came the accusations that detonated everything. Candace alleged that Charlie Kirk's death raised questions that no one wanted to answer publicly. She didn't present them as final conclusions, she framed them as inconsistencies. Why were certain reports sealed? Why were key details inaccessible? Why did official explanations feel incomplete, even contradictory? And why, she asked, did anyone who pushed too hard suddenly find themselves shut out? She pointed to what she described as a sealed autopsy, questioning why transparency was limited. She questioned narratives around the weapon used, citing outside experts who allegedly disputed elements of the official explanation. And she asked the question that made people visibly uncomfortable. Who benefits from this story never being revisited? That's when she turned her focus to security. Candace openly questioned how someone as high profile as Charlie Kirk could be left exposed. She referenced interviews where blame was shifted toward law enforcement, and then asked whether that shift itself was convenient. According to her, it felt like a controlled narrative, one that redirected scrutiny away from the people closest to the situation. She did not accuse. She implied. And implication in powerful circles can be more dangerous than accusation. Behind closed doors, according to people familiar with the fallout, tension inside Turning Point USA escalated rapidly. Candace's name became radioactive. Staff were warned not to engage. Allies were advised to distance themselves. And when Tpuza finally responded publicly, the message was blunt. Her claims were irresponsible, baseless, and harmful. But instead of debating her point by point, they challenged her to something else entirely, a public confrontation, a live stream, a spectacle, a moment designed to put her on the defensive. Candace refused. She said it wasn't about transparency, it was about humiliation, about baiting her into a setting where the narrative could be controlled, edited, clipped, and weaponized against her. In her view, the invitation wasn't an olive branch, it was a trap. And that refusal became the turning point. Because after that, the story wasn't about questions anymore. It was about credibility. Influencers who once echoed her concerns began calling her obsessed. Commentators labeled her unstable. Former allies used phrases like mental health and spiraling, the kind of language that doesn't rebut arguments, but discredits the person making them. The shift was subtle but unmistakable. Then came the lawsuits. Charlie Kirk's parents moved to shut Candace down legally, accusing her of exploiting their son's death. They sought court intervention to stop her from speaking, posting, or theorizing publicly. For Candace, this was the moment that confirmed her worst fears. She said it proved that the goal was never clarification, it was silence. The optics were devastating. A grieving family versus a controversial media figure. A lawsuit versus live stream speculation. Emotion against suspicion. Public opinion swung hard. Sympathy flooded toward the parents. Candace's supporters fractured. And suddenly, asking questions became synonymous with cruelty. But Candace didn't retreat. Instead, she claimed the legal pressure validated her concerns. She said that if her questions were truly baseless, they wouldn't require suppression. She argued that the speed and severity of the response suggested panic, not confidence. And then she said something that chilled even her supporters. She warned that people who know the full truth have already decided how this ends. No timelines. No names. Just a warning. She described a pattern she says she's seen before. Discredit first, isolate second, silence last. According to her, the campaign against her wasn't spontaneous outrage, it was coordinated damage control. And the most unsettling part, she claimed, was how quickly everyone fell in line. Because once the parents took legal action, the rest followed. The board went quiet. The organization stopped engaging. Security said nothing. Friends vanished. And the silence grew heavier. To critics, this was the natural consequence of reckless speculation. To Candace and her remaining supporters, it looked like confirmation. Two realities now exist side by side. In one, Candace Owens crossed an unforgivable line, weaponizing tragedy for attention. In the other, she walked straight into a wall of power that decided she knew too much. And the truth? It may never be proven either way. But what cannot be ignored is this. The questions did not disappear. Only the people willing to ask them did. This story is no longer about who is right. It's about who is allowed to speak. And as this saga continues to unfold in courtrooms, comment sections, and whispered conversations, one thing is clear. The most dangerous moment isn't when accusations are made. It's when everyone stops responding. Because that's when the narrative is no longer being defended. It's being buried. The fallout didn't explode all at once. It crept in, slow and suffocating, like a pressure change no one warns you about, until suddenly you can't breathe. By this point, Candace Owens wasn't just controversial. She was radioactive. Rooms went quiet when her name came up. Invitations stopped. Back channels froze. People who once argued loudly now chose carefully worded silence. And in political media, that kind of shift doesn't happen organically. It happens when a line has been crossed, not morally but strategically. Candace says she felt it immediately. She describes it as a moment when the fight stopped being public and became procedural. Not debates, not rebuttals, but lawyers, statements, distance. The machinery turned on and it didn't need to scream. It just needed to keep moving. Because by then, the story wasn't about what Candace was saying. It was about what would happen if she kept saying it. Behind the scenes, the narrative hardened. According to people watching closely, the goal became simple. Make her claims impossible to engage with by making her impossible to take seriously. Every appearance was reframed as obsession. Every question became evidence of instability. Every refusal to cooperate was spun as guilt. And the tragedy is, it worked. The conversation shifted from what happened to what's wrong with her. That's when Candace made a claim that split even her remaining supporters. She said the pattern was familiar. She argued that when powerful institutions feel threatened, they don't always deny. They outlast. They wait for public fatigue. They let credibility erode. They let time do the work that confrontation cannot. And she warned that once that process starts, there is no going back, because the story is no longer about facts, but about who people feel safe believing. At the same time, the legal process moved forward quietly. Documents, filings, motions. No explosive headlines, just steady pressure. The kind that drains energy and resources without making noise. Candace said the intent wasn't to win in court. It was to exhaust. To make speaking cost more than staying silent. And the chilling part? She says it wasn't just her feeling that pressure. Others who had privately raised concerns suddenly disappeared from the conversation. Not publicly discredited. Not attacked. Just gone. Accounts deleted. Comments scrubbed. DMs unanswered. As if a switch had been flipped and everyone received the same memo at the same time. Meanwhile, Turning Point USA moved on. Events continued. Messaging sharpened. Charlie Kirk's legacy was framed tightly, cleanly, without cracks. There was no space for ambiguity. No room for unresolved questions. The story had been decided, and repetition began to replace inquiry. Candace watched that happen and said it confirmed everything she feared. She accused the organization of prioritizing stability over truth, of choosing optics over accountability, of treating Charlie not as a loss to be examined, but as a symbol to be preserved. And symbols, once set, cannot be questioned without consequences. But even as she spoke, the audience thinned, because people are drawn to certainty, not complexity. And this story had become complicated, uncomfortable, and risky. Supporting Candace now meant being associated with speculation, with grief, with allegations no one could neatly resolve. So most people chose the safer option. They chose quiet. And that quiet became the loudest statement of all. Candace began framing her position differently. Less about proving anything, more about recording it. She said history has a way of revisiting moments that felt settled, and that her role now was to make sure the questions existed somewhere, even if no one wanted to answer them yet. She spoke about legacy, not Charlie's but everyone else's. About what it means to close ranks when things get uncomfortable. About how movements test their values not when they're winning but when they're shaken. And about how easy it is to call someone dangerous when listening feels more dangerous. By this stage, the divide was complete. One world saw Candace Owens as a woman who crossed a sacred line, dragging grief into the spotlight and refusing to let it rest. The other saw her as someone who asked the wrong questions in the wrong place, and paid the price for it. There is no reconciliation between those worlds. And that may be the most tragic part. Because somewhere in the middle sits a truth that may never fully surface. Not because it was disproven, but because pursuing it became too costly. Candace has not stopped speaking. But she has changed how she speaks. Less urgency. More warning. She now talks about endings. About how stories like this don't resolve with revelations. They fade. They disappear under newer headlines, louder scandals, fresher outrage. And when that happens, the silence wins without ever having to explain itself. She says the people who know what happened are counting on that. Counting on time. Counting on fatigue. Counting on fear. And maybe they're right. Because attention has already moved on. But the question remains unresolved and heavy. If nothing was wrong, why did everyone react as if something was? This is not a story with closure. It is a story with consequences. And whether Candace Owens is remembered as reckless or courageous will depend on who gets to write the final version. Until then, all that's left is the echo. The unanswered questions. The sealed records. The friendships that vanished. The conversations that never happened. And a movement that learned, in real time, how quickly silence can replace truth, when speaking becomes too dangerous. Because the most powerful stories aren't the ones that end loudly. They're the ones that are never allowed to finish at all. If you made it this far, don't click away. Not yet. Because stories like this don't survive on headlines, they survive on witnesses. And right now, you are one of them. This isn't about picking sides. This isn't about liking Candace Owens or defending anyone else. This is about something far more uncomfortable. Who gets to ask questions, and who gets punished for it. If you believe silence should never replace truth, hit like. If you think powerful people should never be above scrutiny, subscribe. And if something about this story doesn't sit right with you, if the timing, the reactions, the sudden quiet feels off, drop a comment. Even one word. Even an emoji. Let it be known you were here. Because algorithms bury stories the moment people stop engaging. And silence is exactly what keeps uncomfortable narratives from ever being revisited. Share this video with someone who still believes asking questions isn't a crime. Send it to someone who understands that tragedy doesn't cancel accountability. Post it where conversations are still allowed. Whether Candace Owens is right or wrong is not the only question anymore. The real question is this: what happens when fear decides who gets hurt? Stay alert, stay curious, and don't let this story disappear just because it makes people uncomfortable. Because the moment we stop watching, that's when the silence wins.